Hey, Katelyn, how is it going?
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on for so many reasons. One of which is what we're going to talk about today when it comes to campaign planning, getting your emails out the door, specifically for end of season giving. We all know it's a hectic push. There's a lot going on, and we're trying to make sure that let's make sure nonprofits have the tools to have all their ducks in a row, so they're executing that campaign to its fullest capacity and ability. But before we get there, Caitlin, you and we've known each other. It's almost about a year, I think, is when we first came across our paths, and we did a fun little webinar last year around end of year giving, and kind of getting nonprofits prepped up in the digital aspect of things. And I've kind of just brought you along with me over to iDonate. But before we get going, what do? You've got some things going on that you actually do for a full-time job.
Yes, I do. I am the CEO of KB Digital. I'm an email marketing consultant that works with nonprofits. I help nonprofits with all of their email marketing needs, whether that be producing emails or helping with strategy. I kind of run the gamut on all things email marketing and fundraising.
And that's phenomenal. I know there's so much that goes into that, which is why we're talking today. And I'm in the much more of the obviously the website and the donation page area. So I'm glad to get someone tapping in from email. And you and I were hanging out at the monthly giving summit last week, as of when we're recording this, and there were so many things that were brought up in terms of, hey, what is best practices? What would you recommend when we're thinking about email sends? Not only during a campaign, but also you think about all those new donors that potentially could be giving for the first time. How do we think and look and interact with those new donors to convert them into longtime givers? We'll touch on that in just a little bit. But really, the focus of today is, where in the world do we start? Now, there's a lot of different channels. There's email, digital ads, there's your website, there's social. All of those kind of play into this unity of efforts to drive ultimately donation dollars, right? To drive a mission forward. From an email perspective, though, and really a campaign perspective, let's just get right into the fun. Where are we starting
Yeah.
with that?
Yeah, I think when you're starting to work on a campaign is really one event that has a beginning and an end. It has a theme. It has one goal. And typically, if it's end of year campaign, that is fundraising. And so making sure that you're starting with all those things in mind. I like to provide a campaign brief or like create a campaign brief. And in that brief is just, maybe it's 2 pages. It doesn't have to be super long. An overview of the campaign, talking about some dates, when things are deploying, the channels that you're going to be deploying them on, who's the audience that you're talking to. Really like suss out all of that with your team and decide what this campaign is going to look like, who you're going to target, what are your, asks of your audience during that time. And once you have that and you have it approved by your team, by your CEO, by your, make sure all of your teams are talking and working on this together, then you can really move forward with more of like messaging. And I think that's like sometimes gets missed. Like we just jump right into let's create the emails or the social posts, and there's really no strategy behind it. And I think to be successful, we have to make sure we're planning ahead. Right now it's September, but you should be starting to plan for your end campaign and making sure everyone's involved to make it a success.
That's great. And what I've found in the past is so much of the success or the ongoing success of a campaign comes down to that first step.
Mhm.
What tools are you using? Are you just like run the Wild West and using a Google Sheet, or using things like Asana? There's a lot of different campaign tools. Like, what do you see most nonprofits using right now?
I think, you can't go wrong with a Google Doc, right? And I'm happy to share a template of like what, I use. I use a Google Doc, but some organizations do use Asana, Monday, any sort of project management tool that you can. It really is whatever you can, whatever you already have existing, I would use that. Everyone knows how to use a Google Doc or a Word doc. And so I think that's a great place to start.
And I've seen your templates. I'll link
Yeah.
it in the show notes. And I think Google Docs is probably the easy, most accessible thing. You think about money. Right? Do you want to spend money on Asana, or do you want to put that towards,
Yeah.
efforts to promote your mission? So Google Docs, it's a good place to start. Okay. Once you've got that campaign brief, and actually before we go there, how long does that usually take to create? Like for those of that are just starting to step into this planning idea, like what should you budget in terms of time?
Yeah. It depends on your organization and how many stakeholders are involved. I work with another digital strategist. We usually knock these out within like 2 to 3 weeks. And what we do is we create all the content, like we get a content dump. So send us, your favorite emails from the year. Send us your favorite blog posts. Send us your favorite stories or something that performed really well, something that didn't perform well. So looking at all of that content and seeing like what are people really responding to? What is our audience like? What do they not like? And deciding like the themes based on that. And I think a lot of us, especially smaller nonprofits that I work with, think that you have to come up with like new content for your year-end campaign, but you really don't. You can look at the content that you've used in the past that's worked well and maybe revamp it or revise it or update it and maybe create some new graphics to go along with it or add a video to it or something like that, where you're not starting from scratch. So it does just depend on how creative you want to get. We've seen organizations start this planning process in September and it takes about a month. And then they sort of start like building it out more. So it does just depend on your group and the stakeholders that are involved and how like new you want to get with it.
I think it's the marketer's favorite fallback. Well, it depends. Let's
Depends.
not commit. I think what I've seen successfully done in the past too is you take a look at your go live date. So in this case, if it's Giving Tuesday, if it's sooner, if you're warming up your donor audience, you work your way backwards, and that gives
Yeah.
you a little bit more time too. Some of those project management tricks I've learned the hard way in my past. Now, you mentioned thinking about old content and then kind of giving it a facelift. And that goes into kind of my next question I had for you, content creation. And there's a lot that goes into that. And for for those that are stepping into this whole idea, let's do a somewhat organized campaign, that could be really scary. What are some of the things that you're thinking about as you're helping to nonprofits to set up the content creation process for deployment in a few steps down the road?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is to like focus on those, the big dates, like Giving Tuesday and the last week of the year, is when you're going to really see a lot of activity. And so, how can you plan the content around those days? I like to think about like you mentioned, a warm up phase. So, if you're one of those organizations that like waits until, um, a campaign comes to ask and you're not really engaging with people in between those asks, then you're not going to get the results that you could get if you really built a relationship, cultivated your audience, warmed them up before you start asking. So, normally I say start the warm up process like early November and then, Thanksgiving comes. So you want to send some sort of gratitude posts and like I said, take some stories that you have created in the past and reuse them, repurpose them. Maybe you can send an email that's directly from the person who the story is about and get kind of their sign off on it and test that out and see how that goes. Try new things, but also making sure that on those big dates, um, you're like just doing a straightforward ask. It's not anything fancy. It's just really, this is the last week of the year. Give to us to make our work possible. Um, so there's kind of themes like the warm up, then the ask, and then we'll continue building trust over time. And then at the end of the year, you really hit them hard with like the fundraising asks.
That's a great point too. Before we get into the really designing and writing the emails,
Mhm.
Which comes first, the designing or the visual design or the copy that you write?
They kind of happen in tandem. I think what I've started to do with some clients, thanks to my friend Beth Rader, who also does some email copywriting and digital strategy, is when you're creating the brief, that's when you decide what type of content is going to go within the email. So we're not writing the email, but we're creating some bullet points. Like in this email, we want to show this impact. In this email, we want to tell this story. And so you have an idea of like what's going to be in the email. And you can think a little bit further based on what's going to be in the email. If you want to create some design components, I would stray away from like too much design. I think that what we've learned, and you can do a mix of both designed emails and not designed emails to see how your audience reacts to it. But I think like we get a little bit stuck in trying to make things over designed, and people give to people. And so if there's a way for you to make it more humanized, personal, then that always works really well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the trends I've noticed, not only with a lot of high performing nonprofits, but also on the business side, is actually stripping almost all of the imagery out of emails, making it very much like a personal, almost, if you could handwrite an email, that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Or you're sticking to one very, very impactful image to really reinforce the story that's being told within these emails, right? I know you're a huge proponent for using stories, actual stories from supporters and donors within your emails as a way to reinforce the ask and the impact of a donation, not only just in this giving season, but as you move on past into January 1, 2025 and on. Is that still the case? Is that still the move?
Yeah, it's definitely still the move. But like I said, people give to people. They want to hear from the actual person or people that they're helping and how they're helping them. And so anytime you can incorporate that, you're going to see a big success, I think.
Okay. And then last question for the next section here, only because with the rolling out of AI over the last year and a half to 2 years, so much advancement in tech space. What tools are you using or seeing nonprofits use to help create some of the imagery or some of the supporting elements where there is design needed, if, say, we don't have a budget to go get someone to do that for us?
Yeah. So with design, I always use Canva. I love Canva, and they have incorporated some AI into their designs. So I definitely recommend Canva. And then for content, I started using CauseWriter, and that was created by Whole Whale. I don't know if you know of them. They're a digital marketing agency for nonprofits. And what you do is you feed the AI your organization tone. You can feed them like your website, blog posts. They learn about your organization and how you really present yourself. And then they help you create content based off of that. Now, as we know, AI is not perfect. So take it all with a grain of salt. You don't want to like throw in, write this email for me, because there's a human element that needs to be there. But it is a great way to like get you started, especially if you're a nonprofit and you're like, we don't have time to write 12 emails. I just love that product and I use it all the time.
Yeah, it's a great point in that I think a lot of us learn quickly that this is not a magic tool that we could
Yeah.
just hands off. I use ChatGPT a lot, but mainly it's for my grammar.
Yeah.
So Lord knows I've only got one set of eyes that I don't always see everything. But then also to help refine to, my favorite thing is, hey, write this at a 10th grade reading level. We spent college and all of our years learning how to write these 20-page essays, and now here we are looking to make it the most simplistic way it is, but such
Yeah.
is life. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
The other thing that
Yeah.
I use AI for is subject lines.
Oh,
So
yeah.
subject lines, you always want to test out your subject lines to make sure that they're landing. If you don't have a good subject line, nobody's going to read your email. So spend a lot of time on that. I think people discount how important it is. Spend a lot of time on your subject lines, see how they perform. And so you can say to AI, give me 10, 10 subject lines and kind of pick and choose from those.
The variations is my favorite because then I can get somewhat close. I still have to refine, but it does the thinking that I don't always have the brain power to do at the given moment.
Exactly.
The other thing about emails, specifically in this season, I think is really important. We had a question last week at the Monthly Giving Summit. Hey, can I put multiple CTAs in my email? I understand the want to make sure that, hey, we want to hit one-time donors. We want to make the ask to do a monthly giving. Maybe there's another cause within our mission that we want to draw attention to, but is that necessarily the best way to go?
Yeah, you want to have, especially for the fundraising emails, one call to action. We're all busy. People spend maybe 90 seconds looking at your email, if they open it. And if you provide them with too many options, then you're going to confuse them. You're not going to get the result that you want.
Too many places to click. It's like a cat trying to get a laser beam. The one thing I have seen successfully done is if you do have or want to call attention to something additional, use the PS or add a PS to the very bottom. Saw a stat this morning, actually about 30% likelihood to engage with that if they don't engage with what's in the main body of the email, which is kind of cool. It's kind of like your last stop there to get engagement and interaction. So again, cool. One CTA, if you absolutely have to, use a PS at the very bottom to add in a secondary call. But otherwise, keep it simple, keep it focused on the mission, which is what end of year giving is, driving donations and fundraising dollars.
Exactly.
Launching. We got all these emails. We have our project brief set up. It's beautiful. It looks visually stunning. The storytelling is on point across the board. How are we launching this thing? How do you there's so many different ways depending on which provider you use. Do you want to, set these up to go automatically? What does that process look like from your point of view for success?
Yeah. So I think we may have, we're going to talk about project management. So, project management is a huge part of campaigns. You want to be sure that you're managing this project. Every single thing that needs to be done is getting done when it's supposed to get done. So I have a template, which I can also share with you, that has like the status of the project, the due date, the tasks, and usually it's a Google sheet. And you can also use Asana or some sort of project management software, but you want to make sure that you have everything lined up. And like you said, moving backwards from the launch date to today, and every little thing, every thing that needs to be done to get this project to launch should be in the project management document. Everyone should agree that their role is, I'm editing this by this date, and someone needs to make sure that those things happen on time, because often what I see is that they don't get done and then everyone's scrambling. And as we know, at year end, it's a really, really, really high stress, busy time of year. Like it just is. And so as much that you can get scheduled ahead of time or, approved even, set up in your ESP, like ready to go, then the better it's going to be for everybody. So I would just suggest making sure that you have everything set up and scheduled a few weeks in advance, so that when these things happen, where, you get that like email from the CEO is like, we're not making enough money, we need to send another email. It's easy for you to hop on that. You're not, having to worry about, well, I have this email I still need to finish, and now you're adding another one to the mix, or something happened on social media, or somebody's out. Like all those things happen, and people are going on break for the holiday. And so as much as you can have scheduled to sort of have that peace of mind, I always suggest doing that. And your launch will hopefully you'll be able to be nimble during the launch period.
And within that planning phase, how many emails per week would you say is the right? And there may not be a sweeping like do this.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of opinions. One, I usually just go one a week in my campaigns, but mine are much structured, much different than a donation ask in a very specific campaign area, which is end of year giving. For you, what have you seen optimal if you can provide an average of what people should be thinking about?
Yeah, I suggest for the year-end campaign, which starts around Giving Tuesday and ends at the the end of December, about 12 emails, and that's on the low end. That is on the very low end. And so I would say minimum 12. And what that looks like is a few emails before Giving Tuesday that's saying, Giving Tuesday's coming, or warming people up. A few emails on Giving Tuesday. You want to thank people after Giving Tuesday. And then you want to make sure you're continuing to like drip emails and build the relationships and nurture them in between Giving Tuesday and year end. And that's usually once a week, you send an email just to, keep them aware that you're there and they're important to you, and showing them how grateful you are for their support. And then really those last like few days of the year, you're going to want to be sending maybe multiple emails on the 31st and the 30th saying like, tomorrow's last chance, today's last chance. Maybe you want to do an extension. It really, I think, ramps up towards the end of the year, and that's when like 30% of the donations are going to come in for the year, they say. So we want to make sure that we're really pushing hard during that time.
And it's like one of those like no pressure at all, but also a lot of pressure too, because a lot of them, most missions find a lot of their revenue coming through there. The one thing you brought up that I want to make sure to drive home, a thank you email to every single donor is so key. Also within that mix in the back end of giving season is a recap of Giving Tuesday. I always like to see those and see where the impact of my dollars that I donated is going towards and what it achieved to help push a mission forward. It's also a great way to say thank you for your one-time donation. Hey, consider jumping to that monthly train, right? Yeah. From an email service provider, or you said ESP, for those nonprofits that are just now entering into this idea of, oh my goodness, we've got a digital campaign planned. We're on Google spreadsheets. We have typically handwritten notes or calls or face-to-face to get these donations, and we want to make that jump into a digital space. What are the best tools for just starting out nonprofits who want to get into this?
I love this question. Usually the best tools are what you already have in place. So check, does your CRM have an email functionality to it already? If so, how can you better use that function? Now is really not the time to like start in a new technology. I think that use what you have now to the best of your ability. If you are looking for a new email service provider, I would suggest looking at what your requirements are. Are you going to have automations in place? How many contacts do you have? All those things really matter. I have organizations that use MailChimp, Constant Contact, Neon One, Engaging Networks. There's so many options, and that can be overwhelming. And migrating to a new email service provider is a lot of work. So just, I would look into what you already have. And if you want a new option, then reach out to me and I'll help you figure out what's best for your organization.
Perfect. I know that it's daunting how many options there are.
Yeah.
MailChimp for me, it was always, at least for me, seemed like the easiest user interface to get moving. And I don't believe it costs an arm and leg too, which is nice.
Yeah.
But if you think about like, if you're using HubSpot, which I'm finding to become more and more popular within nonprofit space, they typically will have the email and the automation workflows built into that. So like Katelyn said, check what you got, use what you got, and then if you need to add some stuff in, then you can have that conversation. But yeah, we're in the time frame where we do not want to do that and stress ourselves out to the max. Okay, we've gone through project planning, how to build a campaign from scratch, the considerations of how do we map out our stories, how do we start to draft the ideas of our emails, the visuals that go with that, the deployment of that to launch date, and then through how many emails need to go out and all that fun stuff. And finally, there's something that typically I don't necessarily always see people promoting as much: what happens after the fact. And I'm really focused here on email statistics, the data that is driven. What do we do? What should we be looking at, Katelyn, to harness that and learn and then grow for not only next giving season, but really throughout the rest of the year?
Yeah. So at the beginning of the planning process, you want to think about what are those data points that you're interested in. And that will help you at the end decide what data points you're going to pull, because there are endless amounts of data points that you can pull. And so at the beginning of the campaign, I usually like to use, KPI goals, and then have those goals, what the current data is, and then what you want to, like, the actual is at the end of the campaign. So things you want to look for, of course, are conversions. How many people read an email, clicked on the email, and actually made the donation? And which emails did they donate from? At what time did they donate? Was it just that last week of the year? Was it the beginning? Was it an email that was telling a story? Was it an email from your CEO? And kind of look further into why. That will be helpful for you to have insights for next year. I like to look into how many new donors came from the campaign, and think about then how can we cultivate them? Do we have a welcome series set up for these new donors? And how many existing donors donated? Also, that's an important one. I always use click-through rates as an engagement kind of metric to see, out of all the emails that we sent, which one had the highest click-through rate, and where were they clicking, and what were they clicking to, and like why. Try to dig deeper into why they were doing that, so that you can take those data points and then iterate on your next campaign.
That's a great point. I use like the open rates and then the click through rates as my leading indicators of success. Usually if I have a high open rate but a low click through rate, it means I maybe from experience here, that
Yeah.
what I was promising in the headline was not fully delivered or useful in the body. For in this case, you nailed it, right? The lagging is the conversion point. So once you made the jump to the donation page, where you're effectively having to put your faith that the digital marketing team and the donation pages and the platform are doing its thing, and helping to continue the conversation that was started in the email. Hopefully there's some continuity, and that's a big thing for us over the next 12 months or 12 weeks, is this idea of continuity and making sure everything's kind of meshing together. That starts up the campaign planning process. And then that conversation on the donation page that picks up should push people down to hit that donate button and convert, right? What are the baselines? Do you have any baselines on expectations, or just at least benchmarks that nonprofits can use if they're starting from scratch on all this?
Yeah, and I can send those to you as well. There are a ton of benchmarks out there, and it depends on how large your organization is. But for click-through rates, you want to look anywhere between, like, I think the benchmark is 3%, but I usually see it closer to like 1 or 2, to be honest. The conversion rates should be around 17%. And then you want to kind of look at also your data. How did you perform last year? And compare to that.
Yeah, I think the open rates sit somewhere in the 15 to 30%. It's a pretty wide gap because there's a lot of things that go into that, right? But from what I've seen too, most people are happy with a 1 to 1.5% click through rate.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
optimal or really good is anywhere between 3 to 6. And then if you're above that, come talk to me so I can get the tips on how to do that. That's great. And then is there anything after the campaign wraps? Typically we'll do like a post reflection period where we spend 30 minutes and talk about what went well as a team, what didn't go well, what we want to learn, what we learned and improved. If there was opportunities to do testing throughout this whole process, which I know there's a lot of multivariate testing with email subject lines and things like that you can do to kind of test along the way. Do you see that that's common adopted practice and kind of this post event, let's learn and grow type of thing?
I wish it was more common. I think that everyone is just so like relieved when it's over and then move on to the next thing. And most nonprofits have limited resources and capacity, and so they don't have the time to then go back and do what you say you should be doing. I think it's really smart at the beginning of the launch to just set a time and a date, send an invite, like, this is when we're going to go over the campaign, make sure you have those KPIs and the data and figure out why it worked, why it didn't work, and what you're going to do next year. And make sure that next year, when next year rolls around, you have some sort of process in place where you then look back on last year and, take those learnings and iterate as you launch the new campaign. It's really important too to make sure this is a time where there's a ton of new people coming into your system. And so really, really, really important to have a new donor welcome series in place, to make sure that you can strike while the iron is hot. Like, this is the time where people are most engaged. And so you want to make sure you have a series of emails set up that are automated, that are welcoming them to your community, telling them about the impact, your mission, introducing your CEO, maybe telling a few stories so that they feel like they made a really great investment in your cause and they want to continue getting to know you and your organization as time goes on.
I call them nurture streams, nurture emails, but the welcome me series is so important. I always speak how much I love to write love on our arms. I'm a huge supporter of their mission, but they do such a phenomenal job with that. Where I just, recently, a couple months ago, went to a monthly donor program, joined it. But it was like emails, welcome me, give me information. I got, physical mail brochures and welcome kits. Like, it goes a long way, especially in a time where a lot of people would argue it's becoming harder to not only attract but retain donors, just because you see this whole generational wave of changing of what I think is important, where I give my money, a lack of resources. I don't think it's necessarily that there's a lack of money or a lack of donors in sheer numbers. It's just getting a little bit harder to make sure that we find the people that are going to be in our corner and be sticky followers. Okay. Katelyn, there's a lot of things that could go wrong during the course of a campaign. For those that are looking at this and thinking it's daunting, something could go wrong, I would argue something will go wrong, but it's okay. As a closing out here, what is your pep talk to people who are looking at this for the first time or maybe the 20th time and saying, hey, this is a concerted effort. Seems like a lot, but like at the end of the day, it's going to be worth it. Like, what's your pep talk to get people moving and getting this thing out the door?
I think it's just get started. Like, I talk about send 12 emails and a lot of people are like, oh, that's so many emails. You don't need to send 12 emails. Yes, that is my suggestion, because the data shows that the more emails that you send, people want those emails. They prefer email communication over any other sort of communication. And so I think it's just start somewhere, do the best that you can, learn from it, move on, iterate, test, try again, do something. And I just hope that it's not last minute, Hail Mary that you're sending. If it's planned, you can know at least you did your best and you tried your best. And, next time I think you'll learn and you'll do better.
Yeah, and the nice thing too is even if you have a typo, very rarely anyone actually cares. If anything, it shows your humanity. It's endearing. It's good. It helps increase engagement from what I've seen. And Lord knows, had my share of typos in my emails. All right, Katelyn, I think that covers everything that, and then some, that I was hoping to get out of this conversation with you. Thank you for being so kind and generous with your time, here. I know that you drop in on a monthly basis with our blogs too. I'm always excited to see what comes out next. There's a lot of things that we talked about. I'll drop them in the notes for this episode if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, or if you're picking this up anywhere else. Katelyn, thanks for all you do. It's hard work. It's hard work with what you do on a daily basis, supporting so many great missions, so many nonprofit professionals across the board. Thank you. That's all I can say.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Katelyn. All right, for those of you listening, this has been the Digitally Native Podcast. I'm Adam with I Donate. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you again next time.